When we begin to recognize the potentials within us, what we see is that we have capacities that already meet the capacities of the technology that we're being asked to replace our bodies. The fact that this message is in our bodies gives us a reason to think differently about ourselves. And we're told there's about 50 trillion cells in the body. So when we ask ourselves, who are we, where do we come from, we need look no further than the 50 trillion cells of our own bodies to know that we are God eternal within the body. There are many people now that believe embracing technology into our bodies is the next step in our evolution. And I say no. Because if we choose the technological route, this is how you lose a species. In my opinion, it's a very dangerous direction. And what makes today so very different, that the technology has evolved so quickly, we now have the ability to change the world within us. And once we give away our humanness, we cannot get it back. We'll always have technology, and I love technology outside of my body, while allowing the technology to serve us without enslaving us. There's a battle for our humanness. Our humanness is on the line. I think the way that we push back on that, it's not about winning or losing. We don't want to win, we want to triumph. And when we triumph, what that means is we live the deep truth of what it means to be human to the best of our ability every day in our lives. We live the best version of ourselves. You'll never create a better world by fighting against the world you don't like. Find a way to live our joy, live our truth, live our humanness. That begins by developing a deeper appreciation for our humanness. Find a new way that makes the old way obsolete, and people will follow the new way, and the old way falls away.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Dreamcatcher podcast, a place where your dreams can find a voice. I'm your host, Celine Chenoy. Thank you to all of you who return every week to tune in to become a better version of yourself. Make sure you hit subscribe if you haven't already, and rate our show if you enjoyed this episode. In an age where technologies such as AI threaten to supplant human intelligence, we need an urgent reminder of the gifts of humanness and what we're truly capable of. Today, my guest, Gregg Braden, is here to do just that. He'll offer his revolutionary views of our innate human technology and how each of us can contribute towards preserving the very qualities that we value and cherish in our species. Gregg Braden is a 5-time New York Times bestselling author, scientist, international educator, and renowned as a pioneer in the emerging paradigm based in science, social policy, and human potential. He has presented his discoveries in over 30 countries on 6 continents and has been invited to speak in the United Nations, Fortune 500 companies, and the U.S. military. Gregg is a proud recipient of numerous awards, including the Walden Award for New Thought, the Illuminate Award for Conscious Visionaries, and he is listed in the United Kingdom's Watkins Journal among the top 100 of the world's most spiritually influential living people for the 7th consecutive year. To date, his research has led to 15 film credits and 12 award-winning books, now published in over 40 languages. Join me on this fascinating journey of exploration with Gregg as he unveils fresh insights about our origins, limits, and most importantly, the remarkable abilities hidden from you for centuries. Discover the incredible potential that lies ahead when you choose to embrace these hidden gifts. Hi, Gregg. It is so wonderful to have you on the show again. How have you been?
Celine, I am beyond epic. I am feeling awesome. I'm excited to be with you today. I'm coming from our studio just outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, here in the United States. The world, it's a very different world from the last time you and I spoke. So I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. It's completely unscripted. I'm going to follow your lead in this dance. And let's see how much we can love and honor our community in the time we have together.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would love to focus on the new book that you have coming out next year in January. I actually just finished reading it. It's titled Pure Human: The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. And Greg, I have to say it was so eye-opening. I didn't realize how critical it is for us to ensure that the technology that we have right now is not slowly like taking over human intelligence. I've actually heard this before from luminaries like Stephen Hawking and Yuval Noah Harari. But I like your approach much better because you're so much more compassionate and you really accentuate the gifts of being human versus the whole doomsday tone that they tend to take. So I just want to start it by acknowledging that.
Well, thank you for that, and that means a lot coming from you. This book, I wrote this book differently than I have in the past. I actually took about 7 months off with just a few pre-existing commitments of speaking engagements. Other than that, I took 7 months to write the book in my home office and studio because I wanted to convey this message in a way that is kind and compassionate, yet honest, truthful, and factual. And it can be some pretty heavy information, but I also wanted this book to be relevant in our lives, Celine. So often you read a book and it's an escape, which is cool. And we all, like that escape sometimes. But I wanted the information in this book to be relevant to what every one of us is experiencing in our lives every day, and not just relevant, but useful. So in the past, I've written the books, on airplanes and hotel rooms and airports, and that's good. But this one, I really wanted to focus on it. So I appreciate what you're saying. Not many people have seen the book so far. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell that you put a lot of work into it. I mean, obviously you do that for all your books, but with this one particularly, like one of the parts that I found particularly fascinating was the chapter on ancient alphabets from languages like Sanskrit and how it contributes to our comprehension of the universality of genetic coding.
Sure.
And you go into like the minutia of it, like you go in the deep end and you analyze every single aspect of that. And I would love for you to tell us more about that and how that can help us in the future of genetics and
Sure.
anthropology, just understanding that parallel.
Sure. Well, we are the product of multiple generations and at least 4 decades where we've been led to believe that we are a flawed form of life, that carbon-based life in general and human life specifically is flawed. And among our flaws are our experience of human emotion that can sometimes cloud our judgments, empathy, sympathy, compassion. These are all viewed by some segments of our technological society as flaws. We've been led to believe that we need something outside of ourselves, that we need something outside of ourselves to compete successfully in the world and to be the best version of ourselves. I wanted to give people a reason in this book to think differently about themselves. And you're referring to chapter 2. Chapter 2, I started at the genetic level. Now, just a little background for those that may not know. I'm a scientist, actually a degreed earth scientist, but I had an unusual background in computer science as it was emerging in the 1970s. So it was a combination of earth and computer science with math, physics, and these are kind of unusual to bring them all together, but they really served me in this book. One of the first things as a computer scientist, and I'll just say this, my role, it was, I worked in the defense industry during the Cold War years as a senior computer systems designer, and my expertise was pattern recognition software. So having said that, when the first iterations of the human genome became available on the new computers, this was something new back in the 80s and the 90s. when we could actually look at the DNA, I knew immediately that it was not random, that there were patterns in the DNA. And many other people have said the same thing. They've gone about looking at those patterns in different ways. My approach was to reference a 3,000-year-old text that has only been translated one time into the English language. It was called the Sefer Yetzirah. It's only about 1,000 lines long. And I read the text as an instruction manual, and I didn't judge it as ancient and obsolete. I read it as contemporary with modern science. And I followed the instructions in that text using the periodic table of elements and the best science of the modern world and my background in linguistics. The bottom line is that the chemical codes that make life as it is, make our bodies as they are, the chemical codes of DNA, have numeric representations that link directly to the numeric representations of ancient alphabets. So some people are very aware of this. This may be new to some people. Every alphabet that has ever been developed, bar none, every single alphabet, all the way back, cuneiform, Phoenician, Greek, Latin, Sanskrit, Arabic, Hebrew, and you name it. They have always had mysterious numeric representations that link them to the letters. And if you study the history of Kabbalah, for example, it's very obvious that there are numbers and letters, and it's not so obvious in other languages. So I simply followed the rules that were laid down in the 2nd century in terms of how you use those letters, and I applied it with the best science of the modern world. And the bottom line is that there is intelligent information encoded into the DNA of our bodies. And this was important for me, Celine, because the context, the Cold War, was one of the most frightening times in the history of our world, where the superpowers came unthinkably close to doing the unthinkable and unleashing nuclear weapons on civilian populations. Sadly, we are close to that again right now, as you and I are having this conversation with the showdown in Eastern Europe. Mm-hmm. My thinking and my excitement around this was when we believe that the differences that separate us are so great that we must hurt one another or destroy one another to solve those differences, and we're looking for a common ground, we need look no further than the DNA in every cell of every human that has ever lived to find that there is a common message that can be revealed in any of these languages. It's the same message in Arabic, the same message in Hebrew, the same message in Sanskrit, the same message in cuneiform, which are the four root languages. And the message literally reads as the words God eternal within the body. God eternal within the body. It doesn't say who God is. It doesn't say where God comes from. That's up to us. But the random mutations that occurred slowly over long periods of time is called Darwin's theory of evolution. And I want to be really clear about this. As a scientist, I totally believe in evolution. As a geologist, I saw it in the fossil record when I did my field work. Plants, animals, insects, very clearly the product of evolutionary processes. What makes us so special, Celine, is that process breaks down when it comes to us. We appeared relatively suddenly on Earth 200,000 years ago. And scientists pretty much agree on that time. 200,000 years, isn't that? It's only 10,000 human generations. We've only been on this planet for 10,000 generations. Yeah. We don't know where we came from. Now that we can examine the DNA rather than the fossil evidence, the DNA is telling us that we are not genetically linked to those forms of life that we used to believe were our ancestors. Australopithecus, for example, the famous Lucy in the Olduvai Gorge, and Neanderthal. We shared the earth with Neanderthal. We couldn't have descended from them. We shared the earth. We actually interbred with Neanderthal, and that's why many people, especially Northern Europeans, have Neanderthal DNA genes in their DNA when they do their ancestry tests. We didn't descend from any of those. We showed up, and here's the thing, we showed up fully intact, fully enabled, with a genome 200,000 years ago. It's the same genome we have today. We haven't changed. Now, obviously, we've changed in consciousness, for sure. But our physical characteristics and our potentials and our capacities were already present. This violates the laws of evolution that says we develop certain capabilities only when nature demands that we have them. This is Alfred E. Wallace, was a colleague of Charles Darwin, and the way he famously said it is that nature never over-endows. Well, the problem is we are all over-endowed, because from the moment we showed up, we had potentials within us in terms of an extended neural network, in terms of the way that we can self-regulate our own biology. We had these potentials that are light years beyond what we would have needed 200,000 years ago just to survive. They were already with us. And that's where the subtitle of the book comes in. I believe it is our destiny to awaken and develop these potentials. But the key, and why this is important, is that when we begin to recognize the potentials within us, what we see is that we have capacities that already meet, and in many cases exceed, the capacities of the technology that we're being asked to place into our bodies, to replace our bodies. The fact that this message is in our bodies, I think, gives us a reason to think differently about ourselves. And one of the reasons that I wrote this book was perhaps for the reader to close the book and walk away, certainly with a deeper appreciation for what it means to be human. But even more than that, I'm hoping that the reader will walk away with a sense of pride. I am proud to be human. And we, our young people in schools, are being taught that we are a flawed species, that we're broken, that we're weak, that we're frail.
The media tells us that, don't they?
Well, the media is supporting all of this. So, yeah. So the chapter 2 in the book, I begin early on by giving us reasons, and this is one reason to think differently about ourselves. And Celine, I want to just say right off the bat, I know this is a very different way of thinking about our bodies for some people. For some people, it's right up their alley. They've always believed this. And for other people, they'll just close the book and say, this is impossible. And this is why I went through the detail that you described. Now, I also have a place in the book. I say, if you don't want the detail, jump ahead to 20 pages and you can skip all of the detail and get to the bottom line and then go from there. But if you want to see how we derive this message, I didn't want it to be on faith. I wanted the reader to know that there's something, and even if they don't fully understand it, they can see the mechanism. Yeah. And the only way to do that is to cross the traditional boundaries of the sciences in the past. I had to cross the traditional boundaries of chemistry and biology and genetics and linguistics.
Yeah. You also talk about movies. I'd love to talk about that once you're done, but...
Yeah, well, I never would have been able to find... If I was just zeroed in on genetics, you'd never see this message. If I was just zeroed in on archaeology and linguistics of ancient cultures, you'd never see it. So I think this is where we are. The 20th century, many people say, was about discovery and revelation. The discoveries, all the big discoveries of DNA, 1953, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Nag Hammadi Library, quantum theory, all of these things, we discovered that stuff in 100 years. Now, the 21st century is, what do we do with it? How do we apply those discoveries? And for me personally, I can't imagine applying them without crossing those traditional boundaries, because the truth is nature doesn't know about those boundaries. There is no boundary between chemistry and geology and biology and physics and nature. Those are the boxes that we put those ideas into so that we're comfortable with their study. So thank you for appreciating. The message literally reads God eternal within the body. And the average human we're told there's about 50 trillion cells in the body. So when we ask ourselves, who are we? Or when we forget what we have been given, the gift that we've been given to the body, and we ask, who are we? Where do we come from? We need look no further than the 50 trillion cells of our own bodies to know that we are God eternal within the body. Now, just one little piece I want to add to this. I wrote this book originally describing the message in 2004. I wrote an entire book called The God Code. I expanded on that in this new book to take it to an even deeper level. That was 2004. And at that time, it was very strange to think of encoding data, words that you read like you read on the pages of a book. It was very strange to think about encoding words into soft, sticky, wet, gooey stuff of DNA. 2007, only 3 years later, Japanese scientists released a peer-reviewed paper saying that they had done just that. They had encoded information into the DNA of a bacteria, allowed the bacteria to live about 200 generations. They reproduce quickly, so it was a couple of days. And after 200 iterations of the bacteria, they pulled that DNA out, and the information was completely intact. They proved that we can store information in organic material, living organic material. And now that that's been done, everybody's doing it. DNA is a better storage media than flash drive on the computers that we're talking on right now, because it is three-dimensional and because of the way the DNA organizes itself. Now, the entire Library of Congress of the United States, so these are all the books that have been written, including patents, all the patents for all the technology, have now been encoded into the DNA of bacteria and stored in a very specific place. And if something horrible should ever happen and we lose our world, all we need is one organism and one functioning computer, and we have all that information to start all over again. So my question, when I began to understand that, I said, if we're doing this now, is it possible that this has happened to us in the past? We've only had computers about 70 years. What would it mean for an advanced intelligence that's had computers for 1,000 years or 5 or 10,000 years? It'd be nothing to store information in DNA. And it appears that's precisely what has happened. So the book begins establishing that we are not what we've been told and more than we've been led to believe, and giving some reasons for us to think that way.
Hello, everyone. I'm excited to announce the upcoming launch of my new book titled The Nomadic Soul, a seeker's guide to finding a sense of self and belonging in the modern world, which highlights a profound yet often unexplored part of your identity that holds the key to everything from answering your biggest questions to finding deeper meaning and joy in everyday life. Visit thenomadic.soulbook.com to learn more, download a free chapter, or to buy a copy. There's also this growing reality of gene editing and chemical treatments that are aimed at achieving desirable traits. And you actually really highlight this because you say the whole philosophy behind eugenics and selective breeding is something that we should be really, really wary of, because this happened in history. You talked about Nazi Germany and how that was done, and how that turned out. And that should be a cautionary tale for us. So tell us a little bit about the ethical concerns about gene editing.
Well, I'm just going to take about a half step back. So there is a concerted effort. This isn't just random, spontaneous evolution of technology. There is a concerted effort to replace our natural biology with synthetics, with computer chips in the brain that are now FDA approved, chemicals in the blood we've seen applied in a few different ways, RFID chips in the body, sensors under the skin, nanobots circulating in the circulatory systems and in the blood. Ray Kurzweil is a visionary. He's an author. I know some of our viewers are familiar with his name. they may be more familiar because he is director of technology at Google, developing a lot of the AI. He released a book in this year. This is the year 2024, almost the end of 24. And the title of his book is called The Synchronicity. And what he is saying, and he's been right on with his predictions. He predicted that computers would be in our homes at a time when nobody even knew what a computer was. And he predicted electric cars. He's made a lot of predictions. He said by the year 2030, which is only about 5 years away, he said, unless our thinking changes, that when you talk to someone in the grocery store or someone on the street, you will not be speaking with a pure human. You'll be speaking with someone that has some degree, some kind of hybrid human machine technology. Some may be more, some may be less. By the year 2045, he says we will all be part of what he is calling the synchronicity. It is the digitization of our planet, the digitization of all the forests, of all the animals that live in all the forest, all the natural resources, all the food that we consume and where and how we consume it, including humans. We will all be part of this big system, this big database that is run by artificial intelligence unless something changes. And the only way to achieve that, and it's centralization, and it's done for power and control. The only way to achieve that is for us to give away our humanness, to give away our biology, and allow technology to replace our natural systems. So that is happening. The policies are being written right now. The laws are they're actually already on the books in some places.
Are you concerned with the new government? Or I don't want to get political here, but
you mean new government in the U.S.?
In the U.S., yes.
This is interesting. In the year 2024 is the first time in the history of the world that 40 nations have had elections in the same year.
Yes.
40 nations elected new leaders, and the people of the world in those elections said, we don't want the direction that we've been going. America certainly showed that, but America's not alone. There are systems that are in place right now that are being shaken up. And where they settle, it's up to us. It's up to us to choose life, to choose our humanness, to choose the values that we cherish in our lives, because there is a concerted effort to replace this. Now, I even know that it's happening, Celine, and I'm still in awe at how slick the marketing is. When you see it on YouTube or you see it on television, the marketing makes this technology look so sexy and so appealing, and especially they're targeting young people that have never been taught how precious a human body is. They've been indoctrinated to believe that the human body is weak, frail, flawed, and that technology is our savior. And so they're being indoctrinated. They show up in my live programs. I have young people all the time, and they say, what's the big deal about a computer chip in the brain that lets me play Grand Theft Auto on my computer with no cables and no keyboard? I'm just thinking. What they don't know, the science, this is peer-reviewed science, is that our brain is producing new neurons. So the breath that we take on this planet, we are constantly producing new neurons. It's a recent discovery. Back in the old days, we were told that we're born with a fixed number of brain cells and that we lose them through our lifetimes, but that's not true. There's a catch. When new neurons are produced in the brain, they must be engaged in a meaningful way in about 7 days, or they atrophy and they die because the body says, you don't need me. When we have computer chips in the brain that are doing the work for us, or we have AI visors that are being used by young children, 3, 4, 5 years old, and they're being used to entertain them for 5 and 6 hours a day. Here's what's happening. those young children, they're seeing images and hearing sounds. First of all, they would never see them in the real world, but everything's being done for them. They are simply observing. They're not using their creativity. They're not using their imagination. And now the psychology papers are showing this. This has happened. It's happened long enough that they've done the studies. Children exposed to extended periods of virtual reality through these AI advisors for entertainment because their parents are busy. Those kids, they have stunted body growth, they have stunted muscle growth, stunted cognitive development, stunted verbal skills, and socialization and relationship skills. And their brain is changing. The visual cortex is actually becoming larger and thicker, which makes sense because the visual cortex is what they're using. Now, because of epigenetics, all this can be reversed. Take those goggles off and engage those young people in physical reality, interacting with other people, exercise, good diet, all that can be reversed. But the point is that the use of any technology in the body, broad spread, there are certainly examples where it may be needed. But for every human on the face of the earth, as is being recommended, they're talking about putting chips into the brains of newborns to give them what they call, quote, the edge, so they can compete in society. We know that when our natural biology is replaced with synthetics, that our biology begins to atrophy. And this is even true of the human immune system. When we begin to depend on chemicals for our immunity, and the chemicals can be effective in some circumstances to target specific contagions, but our immune system is so complex and brilliant. Engineers have attempted to mimic the human immune system synthetically. They can't do it because we have layers of immunity. And when it's replaced with synthetics, we begin to lose. Our immune system says, oh, you don't need me anymore because a chemical is doing it for me. So this is a form of something that we saw early in the 20th century of choosing what human qualities we want, what human qualities we don't want. The question is, who makes those decisions? And they're being made by a handful of individuals that we never elected. You didn't elect them, I didn't elect them, but they believe they know what's better for our world. And they are driving the policies that are being adapted and now made into law. What you're referring to, we saw something similar early in the 20th century. We didn't have the technology then that we have now. But the thinking was the same. The thinking was that there are some characteristics of humans that we want, some that we don't want, and those that we don't want, we'll get rid of them. So the term was eugenics, and many people were proudly identified as eugenicists. This was a very popular philosophy to the degree that individuals that were deemed to not be fit to reproduce, for example, this happened in the United States of America. Legally. They were sterilized legally because the thinking was they had characteristics. Maybe they had low IQ. Maybe they had physical deformities. Maybe they had a violent history. Maybe they didn't look pretty or they didn't look handsome. Or maybe they were of a certain this.
Yeah, they even do it in sperm banks, don't they?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that changed. It's now that we have the technology to implement that thinking in a very different way, and it's being disguised and marketed in ways that make the future look bright and shiny because we've given away our humanness in exchange for efficiency and speed and logic. What we're giving away are most cherished human attributes of empathy, sympathy, compassion, forgiveness, love, and healing. Human healing begins with the way that we think of ourselves. When we hate ourselves, when we have unresolved anger stored in our bodies. Yeah. There's a chemical equivalent for every emotion that every one of us has ever had any time in our lives, from inside the womb, even before we're born. Our emotions create chemicals. They're called neuropeptides. Scientists know this. Most of the time, the neuropeptides metabolize and pass through the body in body fluids, all the body fluids, unless there is trauma involved. So when we are traumatized without the tools to heal that trauma, and every one of us has had trauma in our lives of some kind, when our body can't resolve that trauma, our body stores those neuropeptides in the organs and the tissues and the glands it associates with the trauma, and it will store them for 10 minutes or 70 years. The body doesn't care until we resolve those issues. If we do not resolve those issues, then what happens is those neuropeptides begin to let us know they're there. It might be a little inflammation at first, or maybe a little rash that develops, or maybe a swelling in an organ, or some kind of a dysfunction, just to get our attention. If we don't know better, we think the body is broken and we're sick. And what the studies are showing is rarely does the body break. When we get sick or we have what we call illness, disease, what we're seeing, Celine, this is a very different way of thinking. We're seeing our body in the presence of the epigenetic factors we've given it to work with. Epigenetic triggers. Epigenetics means it's not at the genetic level, it's above the genetic level that influences genetic level. What are those factors? Thoughts, feelings, emotions, the way we breathe, what we focus on, the nutrients in our lives, and the way we move our bodies, movement, exercise. These are all key genetic factors. So when our body begins to function in a way that we don't like, or that a medical doctor will identify as sickness or disease, one of the first things that we can look at is what have we given our bodies to work with? And where can we make those changes? And we've all heard stories of this. People are diagnosed with, a disease, they're going to die in 90 days. And they say, okay, there's actually a story was written about this in the journal, the magazine Atlantic, not long ago. I think it was the Atlantic. A man they told he had 90 days to live. He said, well, that's it. Forget it. I'm going to do everything I ever want to do. He quit his job. He went to Italy. He started raising olives in an olive garden, walking on the beach every day. 2 years later, they interviewed him and they said, what happened to your 90-day prognosis, And he said, I just got happy. Well, what he did, he changed his environment, he changed his emotion, he changed his attitude.
You mentioned that the story we tell ourselves is critical.
Yeah, well, it is. It's a story. We all tell ourselves a story. Well, we all have a story, first of all. It's all based on the way we think of ourselves, and that's called our story. Our story begins with our caregivers, our parents, the way they teach us to think of our capabilities and our limitations, our friends, our society, our culture, science, religion, community, and our own personal experience. If we've had a hard time early in life in a relationship, for example, we may feel that we're not made for relationships. And that's the story. So it's not just the story we tell ourselves, it's the story we tell ourselves and believe about ourselves. It's the deep-rooted beliefs. These are epigenetic factors. So all of these things come into play. We have been conditioned through our education system and through media and society, at least since the 1950s, 1960s, to see ourselves as secondary to technology. And there are many people now that believe that embracing technology into our bodies is the next step in our evolution. And I say, no, not natural evolution, of artificial force someplace we don't want to go. Because if we choose the technological route, if we choose to replace our bodies with these synthetics, this is how you lose a species. This is how we lose our ability for all the things,
Terminator,
imagination, right? Imagination, creativity, Again, love, empathy, sympathy, compassion.
Yeah.
And these are, in my opinion, it's a very dangerous direction. And it is not by chance, it is by design. There are beings, individuals, societies, organizations that have power and control in our world that are now pushing this agenda. And the reason I wrote the book with, there's a little sense of urgency in the book. I mean, we have all the time we need to turn this around. And if we're going to turn it around, now is the time. And the reason for that is because many of these organizations are looking at the year 2030 as the end date, as the goal, when they want to have accomplished these technological changes in the world. The United Nations, for example, has an organization or a program called United Nations SDG 2030, Sustainable Development Goals 2030. 17 goals they've identified that they would like to have in place by the year 2030. And honestly, if you go to the website and you read the titles of the goals, they are beautiful goals that every one of us want. Things like food security on the planet, things like global health for children, things like that for everyone. Then you read the fine print of how they hope to achieve those goals, and what you see is the price of achieving those goals is the relinquishment of our humanness, of our sovereignty, of our ability to communicate freely and share ideas. I am all in support of the goals. I am not in support of the approach to the goals. And they're not the only ones. The World Economic Forum, you mentioned Yuval Harari early in this conversation. He's a frequent speaker at the World Economic Forum. Since 1971, when they were formed, they have had a vision of what they want our world to look like. There's a world of centralization and control, authoritarianism, and they've been unsuccessful in sharing that and implementing that until the year 2019. 2019, they signed a formal agreement with the United Nations to implement their vision through the UN Sustainable Development Goals. In my opinion, this is a very concerning partnership. And I think the greatest concern is, once again, these are a handful of individuals that we did not elect to represent us that now have assumed that they have the right, and now through technology, they have the ability to transform the world. Beyond that, to transform our lives. And we've always, I'm hesitating because I don't know how deep we want to get into this, but we've always had the ability to change the world around us. And sometimes in good ways, sometimes in not good ways. You know, we've clear-cut forests and hunted animals to extinction. That's not a good thing. And we've also replanted forests, and we've preserved forms of life that were on their way to extinction. So we've always been able to change the world around us. Celine, what makes today so very different, and this is just in the last few years, that the technology has evolved so quickly, we now have the ability to change the world within us. And once we give away our humanness, we cannot get it back. It's not like a little dial, you know, where you turn it and you say, well, let's try this. If it doesn't work in a couple of years, we'll go back to the way we were. Because once the human body, this is how the human body works. Once we embrace that technology and we morph and we adapt to meet that new technology, the old version of us is gone. It doesn't work. We've seen this short term, and I guess I gave some examples earlier with computer chips in the brain. The immune system is a perfect demonstration right now of where we're actually seeing this happen. Chemicals that mimic certain pieces of the immune system that have been now embraced into the body, and the immune system now is no longer capable of broad spectrum immunity because it's all focused on very specific contagions. It's a perfect example. A greater example of, as a scientist, I've seen this. I'm 70. I turned 70 this year. So I've seen 70 years of this world. I've never seen what I'm seeing happening right now. I worked in the industry in the 1970s, 1980s, 1990s. And what I saw scientists at that time, there's always been this, a little bit of a controversy as to whether or not just because we can do something doesn't mean we should do something. Just because we can develop the technology doesn't mean that technology should be implemented. And there are some scientists that say, yes, because we can, that's the license to do it. If we were never meant to do it, we wouldn't have developed it. And then there's another school of thought that says, whoa, not so fast. Just because we can doesn't mean that we should. It helps us to understand how these relationships work, but it doesn't mean that we should actually implement these. And that conversation is very much in vogue right now. So I think where we're going to go with this, I think we're seeing it right now.
For the everyday person who's listening to this,
Sure.
Our listeners or people are watching, they are feeling the urgency of this and they really want to help change the tide. What can they do to contribute? That's
exactly where I'm going to go with this. I think what we're seeing is we are seeing two parallel societies develop right in front of our faces. And it's not always like somebody live in one country or another or one part of the city or another. It's happening in our own homes, in our own families, where some of us are all in on all the new technology and everything that's offered, all in on all the new gadgets outside the body, all the new gadgets inside the body, RFID chips in the hands that make your banking easier and your grocery shopping easier, computer chips in the brain, talk to your computer. And then there's another segment of our population that thinks very, very differently. I live in a rural area in northern New Mexico. And when I go to my little food co-op to go grocery shopping, and I meet my neighbors there, they're not having the conversation that you and I are having because they don't have time to think about this. They're struggling to feed their families. Most of them are working 2 or 3 jobs. A lot of them are single parents. They're struggling. They don't have time to think about this. But what they do know is this, that the world is changing too quickly. It's changing in ways that are not good for us. And they say we need to slow down and get back to basics. They are growing a lot of their own food. They're learning how to be more sustainable for themselves, not depend on the infrastructure of a government or a city for their well-being. They're taking their kids out of public schools to teach them, homeschool them, to teach them the values and the trades and the skills that they feel are going to be useful in their lives. And both of those are extremes. I think what we're going to find is we'll check each other out. This is what humans do. We check each other out. And we're going to ask who's healthier, who's happier, whose lives are more fulfilled, whose dreams are more fulfilled. And the answer to that question, I think, will determine where we end up with this. And I think probably what will happen, we'll always have technology, and I love technology outside of my body. But I think we will develop, hopefully, a deeper appreciation for who we are as a species, where we've come from, what our capabilities. We haven't even talked about the capabilities. I want to get into that. But I think we'll develop we'll develop a deeper appreciation for that while allowing the technology to serve us without enslaving us. And I think we're going to have to fight for our humanness, fight by claiming. When we ask people how we push back on this, first, there's another level of this. There is literally a battle. There's a battle for our humanness. Our humanness is on the line because there are organizations, as I said, and there's a philosophy that says we are a weak, flawed species. We need to be replaced to be the best version of ourselves. I think the way that we push back on that, it's not about winning or losing. And I want to be really clear on this. When we talk about winning, about forces meeting forces. It's the old idea. This is the old idea that keeps us stuck in the struggle and the suffering. We don't want to win. We want to triumph. And when we triumph, what that means is we live the deep truth of what it means to be human to the best of our ability every day in our lives. We live the best version of ourselves. We choose joy in our lives. We choose healing in our bodies. We choose to imagine freely, to create freely, to share ideas with one another without them being censored. We choose to heal our bodies. We choose to transcend the suffering of our past. When we live those qualities and those characteristics, we are triumphing over the movement to replace our bodies with machines without fighting. Buckminster Fuller may have said this best. He was I wish I had met him before he left this world. He died in the early 1980s. And he was a visionary scientist. Many people probably know him best. He was the originator of the geodesic dome. If you've seen the architectural construction of geodesic dome, that was Buckminster Fuller. And he probably said this best, and I think about this a lot. He said, you'll never create a better world by fighting against the world you don't like. He says, if you want a better world, find a new way that makes the old way obsolete, and people will follow the new way, and the old way falls away. Don't have to fight, just find a better way. Find a way to live our joy, live our truth, live our humanness. And that begins, we've all heard knowledge is power. This book is about knowledge. That begins by developing a deeper appreciation for our humanness. So now, I'd like to share some of the discoveries. Can I share some discoveries that,
Absolutely.
that beyond the information encoded into our DNAs or into our DNA? We've been taught to think of the human body, again, as this frail biological system, sticky, wet, soft, gooey stuff. And we learn about it in a biology book. There has been a radical shift in the last 5 years of a very different way of thinking of the human body that gives us the reasons to appreciate our humanness. Now the human body is being viewed not from a biological perspective, Celine, but from an IT perspective, information technology. We're being viewed as a system of circuits and technological capabilities that you would think of from an engineering perspective. And this is why a lot of people don't know it. Because the discoveries, they're not being shared in biology books. They're being shared in these obscure engineering journals, the IEEE and the Journal of Theoretical Computing and things like that. But here's what they found. I'm just going to run through a little list here. Sure. Lightning round. They have found, first of all, I mentioned there's about 50 trillion cells, average about 50 trillion cells in the human body, give or take. What we now know is every one of those cells has a tiny electrical potential in the cell, 0.07 volts. And you say, well, that's not very much. And I agree, but you do the math. 0.07 volts times 50 trillion cells in the body. Now we're talking about something like 3.5 trillion volts of electrical potential. 3.5 billion volts of electrical potential. What would it mean if we could harness that and direct it to our healing or our intuition or our creativity? It doesn't stop there, because every cell in the human body literally is a circuit. It's called gated, G-A-T-E-D, a gated circuit. It's got an input, it's got an output. We have the equivalent in the cell of all the components in our everyday electronics. We have in our cells the equivalent of transistors, resistors, capacitors. We receive photons of light into our cells and we emit photons of light. Well, light is information. So we are receiving information and transmitting information constantly into the world around us and to one another. We store information just like we store information on a computer chip. We have access to literally cellular memory just like we do on a computer chip. Here's a really cool one, is that every successful genetic transaction in our species, all the DNA mutations from the time we appeared, are stored as a record in our DNA. That record is secure. It is immutable, can't be changed because it's distributed throughout the entire network of humankind. It's secure, it is immutable, and it's transparent. Can't be hidden. If you know how to read the DNA, it's right there. If those qualities sound familiar, it's because they are the very qualities that are now being engineered into the new financial system of our planet based on blockchain technology. Blockchain technology mimics the way information is stored in the DNA. That's why it's so successful. Blockchain technology, it's transparent, it's immutable, it's secure, and it's distributed. So it's a perfect example of where we're building stuff outside of us that mirror what we already do, except we do it better. And it goes on from there. These are very, very different ways of thinking. It's called soft technology. It's not the hard technology of a computer chip and chemicals and wires. It's more than that. It's the soft technology of a neuron and a cell membrane and DNA. And the beauty, I learned this when I worked in the industry. The beauty of a complex system, Celine, is the more complex it is behind the scenes, the simpler the user interface. So our smartphones, perfect example. You can simply press a place on the screen, a little picture, an icon on the screen with your finger, and set into motion an entire cascade of events without ever having to know how it works. We work the same way. Our user interface is the essence of our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions. Our user interface, as we said earlier, it's thought, feeling, emotion, breath, focus, and movement. When we learn to use these in the right way, to focus in the right parts of our bodies with the right thoughts, and breathe in the way that fuels those thoughts into our bodies, then we set into motion a whole cascade of events in our soft technology, but we don't have to know any of it. That's the beauty. I just wanted, just another example. There was a Journal of Advanced Computing came out with an article in 2022, and this is their language, that human DNA literally is a fractal antenna. Now, what that means is we all know an antenna tunes to a signal. A fractal antenna means that we are tuning to many signals, a broad array of signals across many spectrums, broad spectrums of information. We're picking up stuff, all kinds of information coming into our bodies. DNA is the fractal antenna. So when we begin to think about the human body from this perspective, what the studies are showing, two things. Number one is that all the technology built in the world outside of us mimics what we already do in the cells of our bodies. And I have yet to see any technology, whether it's lasers or communication or radar, whatever it is, internet, I have yet to see anything built outside of us. It doesn't mimic what we already do. The second part is that we do it better. When you look at a computer chip, which is absolutely, are they efficient? You bet they are. Are they fast? You bet they are. But here's the thing. Will always be limited by the physics of the stuff it's made of. So if it's made of silicon, the atoms that make that silicon, they're never going to change, or it won't be silicon, and information can only move so fast between those atoms. So we say, yeah, they're fast, they're efficient, but are they scalable? They can only go so far. And then we say the scalability, it's finite. It only goes so far. Now, look at a human neuron. Human neurons, we're fast. And every time a neuron is pushed to what we used to think was a human limit, what happens is we're so advanced, we're so sophisticated that neuron will morph and it will adapt to that new environment and open up a whole new vista. What is our scalability? We don't know. What the top end of the performance of a neuron is, it appears to be infinite, because every time we reach the limit, we change to adapt to that limit. So we, in many cases, meet and exceed the capabilities of the technology that we're being asked to accept into our bodies. And I just wanted to share that. And we're covering a lot of ground, and I know I'm speaking quickly here, but I want to give people a reason. Well, I want to give people a reason to think differently. Yeah. The movement to replace our bodies with technology is called the transhuman movement. Yeah. Trans means beyond human, so beyond human, and there are movies that have been made about this, some books that have been written. Matrix, but what I want people to know, this isn't something happening in the future. It's already happened, and now the policies are being written and the laws are being enacted for us to require us to embrace certain kinds of transhuman technology into our bodies. So it's about us being aware of what's happening and not angry and not revengeful, but through a deeper appreciation, we get to make healthy choices, a deeper appreciation of our humanness. We say we choose life, we choose our humanness. And I think ultimately it comes down, you were speaking about your viewers. I know I covered some technical things, crossed a lot of traditional boundaries, a lot of new ideas. You don't have to know any of that. It comes down to love. The question is, do we love ourselves enough to embrace the truth of the gift of our humanness that was given to us 200,000 years ago, and the responsibility that comes with being human? And we answer that through the choices that we make in our lives every day for ourselves and our families.
To just love our bodies too. I think people are too focused on the external part of themselves, and just to appreciate the amazing technology that our body is. Wow.
I agree. For those people that are maybe more religiously inclined or even more spiritually inclined, our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions have always called the human body a temple. Yes. And many people think they think it's a metaphor. Mm-hmm. But when you look at the temples of ancient civilizations, Egypt, Persia, Greece, into the Andes of South America, the temples were always built in layers. And the innermost layer, the innermost sanctum of the temple is the place where the greatest wisdom and the deepest secrets were held. It is a place that was always called the Holy of Holies. And you see this in some of the religious texts, the Holy of Holies. Well, if our body is a temple, we have not one Holy of Holy, but we have 50 trillion Holy of Holies, because the nucleus of every cell holds the code that tells us who we are. When we think that our differences are so great that we have to hurt one another to resolve them, we are literally God eternal within the body. And in that sense, Celine, we are literally a walking temple of information. And that's another way of thinking about everything that we just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Gregg, oh my goodness. I can't thank you enough. This has been such an inspiring conversation. And your message is so incredibly vital at this point in time, this point in history. And I think it's so essential for us to take this message to heart and do whatever we can to protect our beautiful species, not just for ourselves, but for the future generations to come. So thank you so much for being here with us.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate what you said. I think it's important to have fun doing it. When we embrace our human capacities, it's fun. It's
Yes.
imagine all the possibilities, and then to share them with other people and see how their ideas and our ideas come together. It's fun to love, and it's fun to heal.
Yeah.
And I think it's important that the joy that comes from embracing our humanness, I think, is a big part of what we're talking about. We weren't meant to suffer and struggle the way that so many, well, we all have in our lives at some point. I don't think that's why we're here. So this book really is an invitation for a deeper appreciation and hopefully a sense of pride, what it means to be human. And Celine, this was unscripted. You didn't know where the conversation was going to go.
Yes, I did.
I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your trust and sharing me with your community, my family, my global family.
Yes.
And I want to thank you for the hub that you have created for the community, the global community that watches you and follows you and your explorations. I enjoy you as well. I love your interviews. So I am honored to be among. Yeah, well, I'm. Thank you. I'm honored to be among some of my esteemed friends and colleagues, and many people that I've never met, but I'd like to, who you've had on the show. So thank you for what you do, and for sharing a little bit of your day with me today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely, and I think you should know that your podcast is the one that's the most downloaded among all the interviews that I
didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we should do a live in studio.
We should. I'll let you know the next time I'm over there in the United States.
Or it means I have to come to Dubai.
Oh yeah, you're more than welcome. All right, Gregg. Also, I just want to let our listeners know, in case you haven't picked up on it yet, Gregg's latest book, Pure Human: The Hidden Truth of Our Divinity, Power, and Destiny. It will be available for purchase starting January 28th. And of course, you have to check out Gregg's other books, his other fantastic books, products, events, and his extensive collection of resources. Please go to his website, greggbraden.com. You can find the links in the description.